Hello, Dion, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you perfectly.
All right. Well, welcome everybody to our live stream. Today we're going to talk about our alternative to ChatGPT, DeepSeek, and in general, let's call it third-party proprietary AI solutions for staff at European organizations. I think there's a couple of topics that we're going to cover. One is the privacy aspect, which is a very popular topic in terms of the latest geopolitical situations. And the other is then also the functionality and how we can safely connect our data sets and provide a true alternative to clients, popular clients that are out there today. So focusing first on the geopolitical stuff and the privacy, I think in the last few months, we've all become aware of Europe's need to become independent in terms of security. And this has brought up a lot of questions with regulated data in Europe, so around governmental data, patient records, IP inside of corporations. And of course, there's a growing awareness that data should remain in Europe and should probably not be accessible by foreign governments or third-party actors. And so we're going to start there with the topic. I want to introduce myself. I'm Bami Ngobet, Chief Revenue Officer at Nebul, and I'd like to also introduce Dion Bonnet. He's our Chief Product Officer. And so for our schedule today, I'm going to start off by covering some of the legislative issues around data governance, European GDPR, data privacy, and these kind of topics, which I'm finding in the last several months are not the last topic on the agenda, but the first topic on the agenda nowadays. And then we're going to move into the actual product, where Dion's going to give us some demos and show us, maybe surprising to some, where an open source hosted solution with, let's say, some enterprise capabilities actually in terms of quality can be better than ChatGPT or DeepSeek or other clients that people are currently using. So let's start with the data privacy aspect here. So one of the fundamental questions that we get very regularly now is, how do we protect our data against, first of all, any third-party actors, but primarily what's coming up is U.S. government access. And the reason that this question is coming up often is because Europe is, to a large degree, European organizations are fairly dependent on Microsoft solutions, as an example. That could be Office 365, SharePoint, OneDrive. And more importantly now, we also get into questions about, connecting AI and utilizing AI. And of course, we understand there are shared models, and there's lots of questions about this. So first of all, if you want to guarantee your data privacy, if you're a corporation, you're a government agency, or you're a hospital with patient records, for example, then you kind of really have two choices. And I'll explain why the other choices are probably not great ones if you want this ultimate security. But first of all, if you deploy something on premises, you're fairly safe in the sense that you're managing it yourself. It's not a SaaS application. Let's say that you're deploying your own data storage, your own applications. You have your own firewall, your own security. You're tracking the network. So you're fairly safe. There's no such thing as totally safe, but you're fairly safe in deploying your own open source LLMs and your own data containers and your own infrastructure. You're safe from external threats that you might not be so safe if you're using an external cloud service or for example, closed source solutions or SaaS solutions. And the other way to manage this, which is an approach, we do both, by the way, we'll come back to that. But the other way to manage this is to go with a truly private EU sovereign cloud. And then that has certain requirements and definitions, which I will cover now. Where you're not totally safe is if you're using a third-party SaaS application like ChatGPT, which has American operators, American owners, of course. Copilot, which many of you know, is just actually a wrapper on ChatGPT hosted by Microsoft, and DeepSeek, of course, which people are nervous about because it's based in China. And so actually this discussion today applies to how do we make sure that the US government, for example, agencies, could also be in reality also now the Russian government, the Chinese government. But we're not going to cover those aspects so much because most of us in Europe are using American-based clouds. And so that's kind of the essence of the conversation today. So let's start with two American legislative acts, which are relevant for all of us. The U.S. Cloud Act was formulated about 3 to 4 years ago and is a result partially of the U.S. Patriot Act. The U.S. Cloud Act actually gives American agencies, any American agencies authorized by the U.S. federal government, access to data inside of any American-owned clouds. That comes down to three checkboxes. One is the data local in Europe. Two, are there US national or American operators of that cloud? And number three, are there American shareholders of that cloud service which might have physical access to data? If any of those three are true, then your data would be potentially subject to that Cloud Act, meaning that even if your data is localized in Azure, AWS, or Google, if that company has American operators or American ownership, which they all do, and this includes OpenAI as well, the U.S. government may subpoena or access that data if they have direct access to it. So that means where most of us think that if the data is in Europe, it's safe. That's actually not the case at all. The U.S. government would still potentially have access to that data and likely does. So that's the U.S. Cloud Act. And then you have the U.S. FISA Act. That's the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, which is an older piece of legislation. And this one is especially impactful to Europeans because if you take a look at Section 702, which has been in force for nearly 50 years, it relates to warrantless surveillance of foreigners, and foreigners would be anyone who's European and not American, via U.S. electronic service providers. Electronic service providers today are defined as companies like, could be OpenAI, Microsoft Azure, Google Cloud, or AWS. So again, there are several reasons why the data may be surveilled or copied or taken. And there's multiple avenues for the US administration, in this case, to access that data. And so the point here is that, in fact, if your data sits on any of these platforms, you're actually not really protected under European legislation necessarily, because the US government operates globally as its own jurisdiction and overrides legislation in our area. So there's a bigger question here about the strategy of Europe and European corporations, but for now we're going to focus in on the kind of the AI components of that, because this is where we're starting to connect all of our data and the part that we're focusing on for now. So again, the three things that you want to ensure if you want to guarantee your data privacy, again, from third parties or from foreign governments, is number one, European data locality, and this is the one that most people are completely familiar with. Number two, you cannot have any American staff or operators, and operators mean people who are administering the cloud and have access to the data. I'll throw in there that this applies to any foreign nationals, generally speaking, as well, where we see that China and Russia also have similar legislation, which would compel their citizens who are actually national state holders, passport holders, to comply with data access as well. And then we should not have American stakeholders or owners, shareholders in those cloud services that would have physical access to data. So you could have a shareholder that was kind of not inside the business and would not have access. That might be okay. It's on the borderline. But I would say, to be totally safe, you should not have American shareholders or American operators. And finally, if you want to protect yourself against general third-party access, probably you shouldn't be using a SaaS or connecting your sensitive data into a SaaS platform. We would recommend that you use open source AI, open source LLMs. We know them today as the most popular being like a Llama 3.3, for example. Or you have the open source version of DeepSeek, which we've tested and generally speaking is safe, because you can look in the code, you can self-host it, you can block any network traffic, and we've not measured any backdoors or anything. And this is the kind of the common conclusion from most companies that are doing this. So then you get into private AI, right? Now, just for 1 second, what is private AI versus public AI? Private AI means you're self-hosting, you're in a private cloud, you're using open source tools, and public AI refers to, let's say, OpenAI's ChatGPT, Google Gemini, Microsoft Copilot. So public AI means it's a kind of shared platform, and private AI means that you're working in a safer manner. So this brings the question, for many are not super familiar with what we mean by this. So the difference between closed source, which would be public AI, and open source, which would be private AI. Closed source is proprietary code. I think Microsoft is a good example. You can't look inside of the code of Microsoft. It's vendor controlled, meaning it's controlled exclusively and privately by that vendor. You have no influence. You can't look into the code to see what it's doing. You can't see how it's storing your data. You can't really see how it's processing your data or treating your data. And then, of course, you're purchasing a license. There's a license restriction that you have to actually purchase the product. So there are costs associated with closed source. They're completely controlled by that private vendor. It's their property, and they're using proprietary code that you have no access to. So we would have no idea, in reality, what they're doing with that data. Open source is a code that's community driven. It could be downloaded from GitHub, as an example. There's many tens of thousands of, or maybe more, open source packages. The code is transparent. So when we download an open source LLM or open source anything, piece of software, we can look at the code, we can audit it, we can see the data flow, we can see what happens, and that can generally be contained within our data center without any further access. In other words, open source code you download, you might not on a license sense own it, but you actually own the deployment and the control of it. It's community driven, meaning that there's a community from the vendor typically as well, but also global community of people who are creating that code, writing it and updating it. It's a little bit like, Bitcoin is an open source package, which is community developed. It's not owned by any particular company. So that's an example that many people are familiar with. And then the other advantage of open source is that it's flexible and customizable. So we can tailor it to your specific needs. And it's something that you can always even break a fork off, and you can design it how you want to design it. In the end, we're talking about the data here, which is the important part. In a closed source or proprietary piece of software, your data is accessible by the external parties that are selling you that software solution. And in an open source software package, your data is accessible only by you. And so the basis of our business is that we would use open source software in a private environment and set that up in Europe in our data centers in a way where we also can guarantee that there's no access by foreign governments or by third parties. And so again, we're moving towards, how do we protect our data, right? That's the conversation of today. And a final note on this, if you look on the left, you can see that these are the closed source proprietary solutions. On the left, the Bedrock, the Gemini, the Copilot, the OpenAI. As we discussed before, through FISA and the U.S. Cloud Act, the U.S. government may subpoena any of these companies for data. They may openly access data from European data sources without permission, in case they already have access to that. And there's also the famous theoretical kill switch argument, which has been enacted, where the U.S. government has actually asked various companies like Microsoft to pull a kill switch on European companies to prevent them from accessing their data and shutting down their email access and everything else, which is a bigger conversation happening in the European Union. And I think that the European Union, has committed to Microsoft as a platform and now is questioning that. And that's a bigger conversation. On the right, we offer with NVIDIA a pure open source solution with open source packages. This means that you can strategically deploy these AI packages, either on public cloud or in our private EU sovereign cloud or on premises, and therefore also gets you away from the dependencies and the lock-in of these proprietary platforms, meaning that we can continue to build and deploy AI solutions in whatever flexible manner that we want without any limitations of how to do that. So to wrap up this first section on legislation and kind of bringing awareness to that, when we say public AI like ChatGPT and Copilot, it's great for learning, experimenting, personal use, right? I mean, we all are using these solutions I think everybody this week is obsessed with converting their photos to cartoons with ChatGPT. It's pretty fun. But when we get to really serious data, and I mean government data, IP from corporations, patient records through hospitals, things that are generally protected under GDPR and are considered sensitive, we say that European organizations should not depend on these public systems or third-party SaaS systems, but that it requires private AI. And this then locks out to the maximum degree the data leakage and the data, the IP, and protecting GDPR. Okay, so these are all really important things. And finally, for corporations, governments, and for the rest of us to use AI within our company, it really needs to be connected to your data. So you can do text summarization, you can do some simple things with AI when it's not connected to your data, but being able to connect it to all of your internal files safely, your databases, your CRM systems, your finance systems, gets you to this vision of AI where we have AI agents living on top of all these sensitive data sets, and then agents also connecting those data sets and allowing us to fully utilize AI. Before we move on to the private GPT product, I just wanted to take one step back to share what does a private EU sovereign cloud and full stack capability look like. At the very bottom, we have NVIDIA GPU superclusters. These would be superpod-like systems. These are the latest GPUs configured in massive configurations of hundreds or thousands of GPUs. On top of that, we build our AI private cloud, which essentially from what we call cloud would be a Kubernetes containerized access to these resources, could also be VMs. And within that infrastructure, you have high performance InfiniBand networking. We have NVLink connectors between the GPUs for parallelization of large batch operations. And we have data storage, enterprise data storage capabilities with S3 protocol, NFS for feeding GPUs, and block storage for powering vector databases and other types of databases that we would run in parallel to the GPU systems. On top of that layer, we have the AI factory. The AI factory is essentially an array of open source software, many hundreds of packages, private, pre-trained models, stuff like PyTorch, TensorFlow, TensorRT, Triton server for running inference. So it's focused around how to build and deploy inferencing solutions. We're also just releasing our inferencing as a service or model as a service, where companies are building AI applications. We give them an API behind that application to run in a sovereign, protected, dedicated manner to a private AI model like Llama or DeepSeek or something where we can isolate their data, give them a single sign-on, and provide an API to their application. A lot of people today are doing this with a ChatGPT API, for example. ChatGPT's API might not be as safe as what you would like, and you might want to exclude yourself from these foreign governments. And in this case, we provide a local sovereign solution in Europe, which has the similar API and allows you to power your AI applications inside your companies or organizations. And then finally, the top of that stack is what we would call private GPT, which is what I'm gonna introduce with Dion in a second. And private GPT is for people to use. So we think that in Europe in the next few years that all companies really will or want to deploy a kind of ChatGPT-like interface. And what we've delivered and built and delivered is an alternative to ChatGPT. It looks like ChatGPT, but it's running on a private open source model, excluded from external governments, utilizing completely private data, and is a way to empower staff for productivity and allow them to utilize AI at the desktop layer through a private web client. So private GPT is accessed through a private secure web client. Inferencing can be accessed through an API for your applications, and the private cloud and factory can be accessed through Kubernetes and containers. So with that, I'd like to introduce Dion. Dion, please, go ahead and take us through, how does private GPT actually work, and excited to see what we're gonna hear today.
Yeah, thanks, Ben, and good morning to you all. As Ben mentioned, it's all about using open source, and that's what we did for the private GPT too. we use the front end of the open source tool OpenWebUI. The backend we completely refactored due to enhancement of privacy, performance, and of course additional features. But as open source already describes, Nebul also contributes back to the community. The Private GPT uses the inferencing layer to leverage all the LLMs that are available through a Nebul API. Next, the Private GPT also uses the Neo Cloud to run each instance on an isolated way, and that way you also have a private vector database available for you. To be able to fully leverage the power of a Private GPT, you want to connect it to your data, but also verticalize the tool towards your specific industry and your specific needs. And this is how we do that. So we start off with the basics. In the middle you can see a ChatGPT-like tool. It's fairly similar. And this is something we call the umbrella product. You can connect with via single sign-on. Just go to your private domain and use your enterprise account. And then you can start using it. On the left, you can see that the standard functionality allows you to upload documents. Those documents will be then automatically loaded, chunked, embedded, and stored into your vector database, enabling the RAG technology. And that way, you can already start using your own documentation and provide it to the Private GPT. And this allows you to get a lot of context related to your company while chatting with an LLM. On the right, you can see that we deliver a standard foundational LLM, a foundational model. We use the latest and the greatest open source model that we can find, and we can connect it to your Private GPT. And in that way, you can really start talking to your documents, basically. But also use it as a generic tool, of course. Then, as an option, you can also connect APIs and URLs as knowledge to your Private GPT. This is done automatically, so there will be an automatic indexing mechanism that pulls out the data that is new, also load it, chunk it, embed it, and store it in the vector database, and make it available through RAG to your Private GPT. For example, this could be a ticket system that you can connect, or maybe an ERP system like Salesforce. Because we can do that, we can also connect directly into your database. So, for example, an SQL database. It can be connected and can be very interesting to leverage all the data that is stored within, for example, different departments, and combine it all towards one system. So you're able to analyze on top of it all. But then if you add a lot of context from your company, it can be that the foundational model does not really understand what you're talking about. So, for example, when you are a notary and you connected your templates, the way the contracts that you usually use, you have your database with specific client data, and then you want to generate a new contract. It can be that the foundational model is trained on generic knowledge and therefore is not able to really understand what you're trying to achieve. And because of that, we also made the availability on fine-tuning models specific to your industry. And it can be that there is a lot of data online, and we can scrape that from websites, or we can download it, put it into a base LLM, and then start fine-tuning it towards your specific needs and your specific industry. So the model will actually understand what you're trying to achieve and have higher accuracy on the results. But if you don't want to use open data that is available on the internet, you can also have the ability to use your own. So if you have a lot of company-specific data that is not viable enough through RAG, but you need to train an LLM on top of that, then we can also provide that. So that can be, for example, when you have a specific code language that you use that a standard LLM doesn't understand, RAG will also not provide the right accuracy, so you want to train a base model that understands code specifically towards the language that you use, so you can start then talking to code, generating code, etc. When zooming in a little bit more on the data connectors, what you already see is that there are a lot of rack connectors available, but especially the need is quite high. Imagine that you want to connect all sorts of sources towards that single private GPT, so you can actually use data from one source, have the context from another source, and then be able to generate something new. So all the data connectors will be created with a real-time sync. So when you create a new document, for example, on OneDrive, it will be automatically loaded, chunked, embedded in the vector database and made available for your private GPT. All the rack connectors will be turnkey, so it will just be an API away, and it covers all the data that is inside. So if you look at the example of Topdesk, it's a ticket system, so it's not only on the ticket itself, it's also including the metadata, which you can then later use and leverage to really understand what is going on with your customers and be able to analyze on that. Then, if we look at the models that we now have available, there are a lot of open source models that we can simply just download, run on our GPUs, and make available through the Inference as a service. And that's what we also do for the private GPT. So over here you can see already a lot of very popular models, like the new DeepSeek V3, which is one of the best models now, open source models to chat, but also the DeepSeek R1, which is more on the reasoning part. Again, we also make the availability on industry-specific models or custom models, if that's increasing your accuracy for the use case that you have. So let's look at some key features of the private GPT. On the left, you will see the multi-source support, which basically means that we can leverage all kinds of sources or uploaded files that you have stored inside your database, vector database, and you'll be able to chat with them at the same time. So there's no need to think about, I have to do more than one chat. Next, we allow you to have multi-model support. So that means that you can have multiple models at the same time and chat to them. We'll come back to that a little bit later, but you can just simply select the model that you wish to talk to and then start using it. All of them are, by the way, run on our private NeoCloud, again, through the inferencing as a service. So you'll be sure that all those models run safely. Finally, we also support the multimodal, which basically means that you can go from text to code, code to text, etc. So you can really leverage the way GenAI is used. Some other features that are very interesting. I talked about the framework before. It's all about verticalizing towards your specific needs for your company. And that can actually be done through prompt engineering. With the prompt engineering, you can fine-tune the use and also the reaction of the LLMs and make it specific for your industry or for your company. There will even be a prompt library in the future with all kinds of best practices how to use optimized prompts, so you can really leverage the best results. Sorry. When you do that, when you create all those prompts, you also want to create assistants, and that's basically a collection of those prompts connected to more reasoning. So if you look at the configuration of the assistants, you can create a system prompt, and that can be more than just one paragraph, of course. It could be multiple pages explaining to the assistant who he is, what he needs to do, what kind of reactions you would like to have, examples that are good, examples that are bad. So fully configurable assistants, and that will really learn how you want to have react. Next, you can connect knowledge collections to it. So, for example, you can ask the assistant, look at this knowledge collection first, look at those data files first, because I trust them more. And then if you cannot find a decent answer in that source, you will go to a different source. You can all configure that in that way. And also the tone of voice. So, for example, when you have a assistant that is rewriting all your emails, because you have multiple resources on your support department, for example, and you want to have the same structure of output, you can create a rewriter assistant for your emails, and you can explain to the assistant that you want to have a certain way of structurizing your emails, you want to have a certain tone of voice, and all that kind of stuff can be fully configured, so you will have a consistent output in that way, and a customer doesn't see the difference between who actually sent the email. And then finally, we have the AI-powered search, which basically means that because you vectorized all your data, you can also search through all your data. And because it's vectorized, that means that you can also use AI-powered search, and that means that you can ask your data with natural language on finding stuff. A good example is you have a million documents in the system, and you're looking for a specific graph or a specific document, and you don't know the exact name anymore. And that's in the past has been quite some trouble to find your document. And in this way, you can just simply start typing. Like it was 2 or 3 years ago, I think the topic was X or Y, and then you actually will be able to find your documents back. So let's look at some more details. Actually, the product. So it all starts with going to your private domain, your URL, and connect to it. So I'll just show the video really quick. I'll have to press it. So as you can see, there's just a login screen for your private GPT. It will be fully personalizable to you, so you can change the skin, you can change the logos. Your employees will be able to just use their enterprise account, and then they can log in through the single sign-on functionality. As you can see, you're now logged in, and you can see the screen. It's, as I mentioned, a bit like the ChatGPT tool, right? And of course, you can log out. It will actually automatically log out if you're not using it due to privacy reasons. Then if we look at the knowledge collections, I talked about it a little bit before. What you want to do is you want to create specific knowledge bases. And what you can do is simply just clicking and adding a new knowledge base. What are you working for? In this case, I'm describing a research paper for AI. I just create the folder, so to say, and then I can simply click the plus button and start uploading files, or even the whole directories. And you see the system is now chunking, loading, chunking, embedding, and storing it into a vector database and make it available for the AI. Of course, you can also delete the knowledge bases again. For example, if you use, if you have all kinds of outdated documents inside that you don't want to use anymore. Then we also spoke about the rack connections, the adapters, and those are the integrations that you can just simply add. So it's a little bit in a similar way as the knowledge bases. So you can just say, okay, what kind of integration would I like to set up? And what is the description? What is the specific URL with the code? And then you will have it ready. And as you can see on the right, it's there's a sync button, but it actually automatically syncs, so it will keep your data always up to date. And you can see also the last sync was a few seconds ago. And this is actually something that when you have the integration, you'll have the data, and when you have the data, you can store it into a knowledge base again. And that's very handy because you can make it very small and later connect it to the assistants, as I tried to explain. And that can be very interesting because if you want to have the best expert possible, you want to make it very small. So for one specific use case, you want to create an assistant that has a specific knowledge base connected or specific integration connected with the tone of voice, with the right prompt, and then you'll be able to have the best assistant possible. And if you don't do that, if you want to make them too big, then they can start hallucinating a bit more, because they get messed up with all kinds of data that they have to think about, and then the results, that's what we see at least, the results become less and less. So this is really the way to go forward. Then the model part, depending on what kind of prompts you want to do, the accuracy of a model can be different. So we made it possible just simply to select the model that you really like to use. And that can be a healthcare assistant, for example, that is being trained on healthcare data, or simply the Llama 3.3, which is one of the latest Llama models. Simply select it and start chatting with it. Then, going back to my knowledge collection that I created, I uploaded the file, some files on AI research. I created a knowledge base for this, and now I also created an assistant for this, and looking specifically to that knowledge base of that research. So what I want to do is just chat with the documents, basically. So I ask a question, and then it will search through those documents first, using the LLM to write down the answer. And then, as you can see, there's always an annotation showing which paragraphs and which chunks it used to come up with the answer. And in that way, you can always find back why and how did the LLM actually create the answer, going back to the original source. So you'll be able to understand, is it hallucinating or not? And actually, this is a nice side step that we found out, is that if it's coming up with an answer that you don't really like, you click on the annotation and you see that there's actually a file connected that is way outdated and that you don't want to use anymore. You can easily find it in that way and delete it, of course. So the model cannot use that information anymore. But in that way, you actually can clean up your data a bit too. And then last but not least, I mentioned it to you before, it's the AI-powered search. And you can go through millions of documents in seconds, and I will show it to you in a minute. So again, I'm looking into the documents that I've uploaded. I can start typing, and instantly it's showing suggestions. And in that way, you can use just natural language, but also keyword search on finding not only the name of the document, but also the content of the document. And last but not least, this is one of our proud roadmap items. It's the agentic workflow builder that will become available pretty soon. And with the agentic workflow builder, you can actually make autonomous agents. And so remember that I told you, you have the knowledge items, then you have the prompts, the assistants, and on top of that, you can actually connect all those little super expert assistants together. So the agentic AI can start leveraging it and starts performing tasks autonomously. But you always have the ability to have human in the loop. So you can ask the agent, for example, to scan what is happening, and based on that, try to understand it, and then do a suggestion on what might be the best way to go forward. But always ask a human to accept or to approve. And this is actually one of my last slides for today. I can say that I'm really proud of the AI team on how far they already got with our product. And we are very proud and very pleased to be able to provide this to you as potential customers for us. So we can all leverage the possibilities of Gen AI without losing our data, without losing our proprietary data, and of course our intellectual property. So thanks.
So we want to wrap it up here. Of course, if you're interested in private GPT or engaging with private cloud or want to learn more, please contact us. You can find a contact form on our Nebul website, or contact Dion or I on LinkedIn, or through our normal contacts and email addresses, which most of you guys know. But please reach out to us. We really thank you for your time today, and looking forward to the next one. Thank you, Dion.
Okay, thank you too, Ben.
All right.